Howdy readers, I'm Jason. This is Chapter and Verse. And this is another ramble with the yarn. Now, so here's the thing. So I have been doing rambles with the yarn on my channel for probably, I'd say, 2 years. And it used to be a monthly feature. But then this last year, as I've already talked about on the channel multiple times, everything just kind of went off the rails with the pandemic, and that didn't help get it back on the monthly feature saddle, so to speak. But over the last year, I have found myself really taken with weekend videos, well, in Steve's case, daily videos sometimes, where booktubers that I love and am friends with have been making videos where they just talk about a whole variety of things. And those booktubers are Steve Donoghue, who has these videos that he does on occasion called Megastuff videos, named after his love of Megastuff Oreos, where, in his words, he kind of brings together a bunch of topics, ideas that wouldn't necessarily make videos in themselves, by themselves, and just kind of puts them all together. And then there's Brian from Bookish, and Brian does a video that he calls his Saturday Hodgepodge. His Hodgepodges are one of the videos that my wife Kelly and I, in case you don't know, my wife Kelly is a booktuber as well. Her channel is Books I'm Not Reading. And Brian's Hodgepodge videos are staples for us. I mean, we always watch his Hodgepodge video. We may not always comment, but we always watch his Hodgepodge videos. And in those, I mean, he talks about what he's been reading, and sometimes talks about fishing, and he sometimes does shout outs of other booktubers. Sometimes he talks about politics. His video yesterday was all about politics, given what happened at the Capitol on Wednesday. And then there's Lukas, whose channel is A Cruel Reader's Thesis, and his videos along these lines are called Sunday Miscellanys. And basically what he does in his videos is just catches you up on what he has been reading that previous week, what films he's watched, and what music he has listened to. But anyway, so like, why am I saying all this? Why am I kind of going down this this rabbit hole? So for probably 3 or 4 months now, I have been, trying to get back in the habit of making videos, trying to get back on something like a regular schedule. It hasn't been easy. It hasn't been entirely successful. Clearly, if you follow my channel, you'll know that. But for 3 or 4 months now, it has struck me that that I might do something similar with my Ramble with the Yarn videos, that I might make it a kind of weekend staple, right? It would allow me to make greater progress on my crafting, but it would also allow me to be a more regular presence, I suppose, here on my channel and in all of your feeds. And one thing that I could do is just kind of chat about, like Lukas does, chat about what I've been reading over the past week, kind of a Friday read, but on a Sunday night, and then talk to you about the films, because, over the last year, I've been watching a hell of a lot more movies than I have in years. So consider this an inaugural attempt at a regular weekly ramble with the yarn, in which I talk about books and movies and whatever else might be on my mind. Let's start with books, and the first one I want to talk about is the book that I finished this morning, and that is The Plot Against America by Philip Roth. And I have been reading this now. I think I started it right after the election, because it felt, I've been wanting to read it for many, many years now. This was published like 17 years ago. And I've been wanting to read it that whole time, but particularly the last 4 years during Trump's administration. But I haven't read it during those 4 years because it felt like it would be somehow too close to home. And so, after the election was over, and I think, once it became reasonably clear that Biden had won, I thought, now I can read The Plot Against America. And so maybe that would be, a good thing to kind of take my mind off of everything that's going on, even as it maybe brings into sharper focus some of the things that have gone on the last 4 years. And for those of you who don't know, so this is a kind of alternate history novel that imagines a world in which Charles Lindbergh, who was a Nazi sympathizer in real life, challenges FDR for the presidency, and Lindbergh wins and aligns the United States with Nazi Germany. And it follows the fortunes of a Newark, New Jersey family, in which the youngest son in that family is Philip Roth. And it's marvelous. It was made into an HBO miniseries a couple years ago. I have not seen the miniseries yet. And what I wanted to talk about with this novel primarily was the phenomenon in which what we're reading kind of lines up with what's happening in the world around us, and or in our own personal lives even, right? And it somehow makes the book more extraordinary. It somehow kind of deepens the experience of reading the book. But then you also feel like the book is speaking to you where you are in a way that the art usually doesn't seem to be doing, to a degree that it doesn't seem to be doing. So, for instance, years ago, I was reading Bleak House by Charles Dickens, and there is a character in that novel, right? Spoiler alert, there's a character in that novel, a young boy who dies. And I think I knew, right? I think I knew, even going into the reading of that book, that character died. But when I read the scene of his death, I just happened to read it on the same day that I learned of the death of the son, who I think was 12 years old at the time that he died, of the man who had been my best friend all throughout childhood. And he and I had had a falling out. I think it was like in my late 20s, I suppose. And so we weren't really talking much anymore. But I was devastated by the news of the death of his son, and reading about the death of the character in Bleak House on the same day, just hours after finding that out, was there was something really sobering about it, something harrowing about it, I suppose one could even say. And I've had experiences similar to that, where the book that I'm reading in a given moment is somehow in conversation with what I'm living through at that time. And this happened the other day. So so again, right, the Capitol riots happened on Wednesday. And then shortly after that, the right-wing media, et cetera, started floating this idea that it wasn't actually far-right rioters who had done this violence to the Capitol on Wednesday, but that it was a bunch of lefties disguised as rioters on the Capitol. And and then reading, of course, about all the crazy QAnon stuff and how, a lot of the stuff that these QAnon people believe has its roots in these kind of strange anti-Semitic folktales and myths from hundreds and hundreds of years ago, involving the drinking of blood and cannibalism and whatnot. But anyhow, so this was, I think, on Friday night. I was reading this, reading The Plot Against America, and I'm just going to read you a little more than a page of what I read, and just chat a little bit about it in relation to everything going on. Wednesday, October 14th, 1942. In the early evening, Mayor LaGuardia calls a press conference to point in particular to three manifestations of the, quote, sheer derangement that is threatening the nation's sanity. First, a front-page Chicago Tribune article, datelined Berlin, reports that the 12-year-old son of President and Mrs. Lindbergh, the child believed to have been kidnapped and murdered in New Jersey in 1932, has been reunited with his father at Berchtesgaden after having been rescued by the Nazis from a dungeon in Krakow, Poland. where he had been held prisoner in the city's Jewish ghetto ever since his disappearance, and where each year blood was drawn from the captive boy to be used in the ritual preparation of the community's Passover matzos. Second, House Republicans introduced a bill calling for a declaration of war against the Commonwealth of Canada should Prime Minister King fail to reveal the whereabouts of America's missing president within 48 hours. Third, law enforcement agencies in the South and the Midwest report that the, quote, so-called anti-Semitic riots of October 12th were instigated by, quote, local Jewish elements working as part of, quote, a far-reaching Jewish conspiracy intent on undermining the country's morale. Of the 122 killed in the rioting, 97 have already been identified as, quote, Jewish provocateurs, seeking to deflect suspicion from the very group responsible for the disorder and plotting to take control of the federal government. Mayor LaGuardia says, quote, there's a plot afoot, all right, and I'll gladly name the forces propelling it. Hysteria, ignorance, malice, stupidity, hatred, and fear. What a repugnant spectacle our country has become. Falsehood, cruelty, and madness everywhere, and brute force in the wings waiting to finish us off. Now we read in the Chicago Tribune that all these years, clever Jewish bakers have been using the blood of the kidnapped Lindbergh child for making Passover matzahs in Poland, a story just as nutty today as when it was first concocted by anti-Semitic maniacs 500 years ago. How it must please the Fuhrer to be poisoning our country with this sinister nonsense. Jewish interests, Jewish elements, Jewish usurers, Jewish retaliation, Jewish conspiracies, a Jewish war against the world. To have enslaved America with this hocus pocus. To have captured the mind of the world's greatest nation without uttering a single word of truth. Oh, the pleasure we must be affording the most malevolent man on earth. So remember, this is a novel set in the 1940s, 30s and 40s, and it is a novel that was published 17 years ago, okay? And reading that about the anti-Semitic riots, right, and how law enforcement agencies and the media are floating the idea that that the rioters in these anti-Semitic riots were actually local Jewish elements looking to stir up trouble and looking to pin blame on the non-Jewish populations. Sounds a little bit like what the right-wing media is saying right now about the riots on the Capitol, right? It wasn't our guys, they're saying. It wasn't our guys. It was our opposition dressed up as our guys. And reading that, I just thought was just absolutely chilling. Yeah, and then, sentences like, what a repugnant spectacle our country has become, right? To have captured the mind of the world's greatest nation without uttering a single word of truth. Oh, the pleasure we must be affording the most malevolent man on earth, right? Which is Hitler. He's talking about Hitler in this book. Yeah, I mean, I can think of one or two other people in the world today in positions of great power that I would have no problem affixing with the word malevolent, right? The adjective malevolent. So that's The Plot Against America. Not anywhere near Philip Roth's best novel that I've read, but far, far better than some of his other novels. And then I'm also 20 pages in. I'm a little bit behind. I was meant to check in with Marc Nash, with whom I'm buddy reading this, and then a woman who has joined the buddy read and whose name is escaping me right now. I'm not even sure if she has a channel, but she's on the buddy read on Voxer with us as well, and we are reading Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. Again, I was meant to check in with them today, but given all of the, obsession with the news over the last week and trying to get Philip Roth's novel finished, I'm only about halfway through my reading for this weekend, so I'm going to try to get caught up in this by tomorrow night, then check in with him, and then I can start on this coming week's reading in Mrs. Dalloway. Right. So the thing about Virginia Woolf, the thing about her fiction, okay, is that it is exceptionally complicated and kind of strangely simple at the same time, right? So it's largely stream of consciousness, and so one gets the sense while one is reading it that she was just allowing herself kind of to inhabit this character, and just write down, just try to think the character's thoughts and just almost transcribe what what is going on in the mind of this woman, Clarissa Dalloway. And so one gets the sense that there's this kind of ease to it. But at the same time, because it's stream of consciousness, it moves backward and forward in time. It doesn't give you any cues to let you know kind of where you're at, or any that are easily discernible. So it's challenging. It's really challenging at times to follow. But it's also so beautiful. She might be the novelist who has my favorite prose, possibly. She might, I've already made a whole video about my favorite sentence in all of literature, which is a sentence from Virginia Woolf's novel To the Lighthouse, and why I love that sentence so much. And I was hoping to find prose like that in this book, and I found it on the second page. And I'm just going to read you kind of half of a paragraph here. For heaven only knows why one loves it so, how one sees it so, making it up, building it round one, tumbling it, creating it every moment afresh. But the veriest frumps, the most dejected of miseries, sitting on doorsteps, drink their downfall, do the same. Can't be dealt with, she felt positive, by acts of parliament for that very reason. They love life. In people's eyes, in the swing, tramp, and trudge, in the bellow and the uproar, the carriages, motor cars, omnibuses, vans, sandwich men shuffling and swinging, brass bands, barrel organs, in the triumph and the jingle and the strange high singing of some aeroplane overhead, was what she loved. Life, London, this moment of June. And when I read that, so the first time, I started the novel. I read like the first 4 or 5 pages, and I was just too tired. And so I restarted the novel the next day. And it was the second time I read that passage. It occurred to me that there's something very Whitman-like about what she's doing right there, right? This kind of cataloging that we see in Whitman's Song of Myself. And you see it elsewhere besides just on that page. And it feels like a kind of prim, early 20th century British version of Whitman's roving appreciation of America, right? Only it's this kind of appreciation of London, but it's the same. It's very much writing in the same register as Whitman's poetry, it seems to me. And there are other examples of it in Mrs. Dalloway in just the first 20 pages of that book. So that has me super excited to read the novel, to get further into it. But anyway, so that's what I've been reading the last week. So just briefly, I will talk to you about the films. And before I get into that, I just wanted to show you something that I've made. So I have been keeping a book journal, just basically a diary, a blank diary, in which I list all of the books that I finish and the dates on which I finish them for about 20 years now, a little over 20 years. And I've long wanted to keep a kind of film journal as well. And this year I finally did it. And Kelly had a blank journal that she wasn't using. I hated the look of it. So, so the design of it was like this, right? Like this. Oh, it was like pink and green, and I don't know. Yeah, it was like a Trapper Keeper or something from the 1980s. And so I decided to decorate it in a kind of crafty way, right? Very much in the style of how I've seen Steve Donoghue, for instance, on his channel, give books that he has new covers when he doesn't like the cover. He did that with the Silmarillion. Why Steve likes the Silmarillion, and Lukas for that matter. That's a subject for a whole another video. I'll never understand people's love of the Silmarillion, but yeah, Steve did this with the Silmarillion at one point, gave it just a completely new cover. And so I did the same here. So the back cover is this postcard that a woman I was friends with for many, many years, but we had something of a falling out about, I don't know, 8 years ago, and have talked very little since then. But she drew my portrait on a postcard, on a blank postcard years and years ago, and wrote Jason, film critic at large. So I put that on the back of the journal, which I think is great, and I think the likeness is pretty decent as well. And then on the front cover, I did this. So ticket stubs, and this here says movies now more than ever. And what that's from is earlier this year I had ordered a Criterion DVD, and they had the wrong booklet in the DVD case. The film was The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, and it had the booklet for The Player, directed by Robert Altman. So they replaced the booklet, but I still had this old Player booklet, and that is actually an image from the booklet of the Criterion release of The Player. So I just cut it up and used that. But anyway, so this is my new film journal. And this last week, I have watched, since the first of the year, I have watched Small Axe, Mangrove, the first film in Steve McQueen's Small Axe series, Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, a documentary from 1969 called Salesman, about traveling Bible salesmen, Code 46, directed by Michael Winterbottom, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, parts 1 and 2, 2046, directed by Wong Kar-wai, Soul, the new Pixar film directed by Pete Docter, and The Secret Garden, the new Secret Garden, which came out in 2020, directed by Marc Munden. And so there are a couple of things I want to do here. So if you have HBO Max right now, Salesman, the 1969 documentary, is on HBO Max at the moment. It's in the Criterion Collection. That is a terrific movie. It is as interesting as a kind of commentary on the life of a traveling salesman and the philosophy of sales, right? That is so flawed in so many ways. How these men approach it, particularly their boss, who makes multiple appearances in the documentary. Their boss is a real asshole. The guy was just a total jerk. But in addition to it being just a really interesting commentary on the life and philosophy of a salesman at that time, it's also a really intimate portrait, because these salesmen go into the houses of these regular people and sit down with them at their kitchen tables, in their living rooms, and talk about the Bibles that they're selling. And it is just a really intimate, really raw, really kind of ghostly portrait of everyday average American life in the 1960s. And I was mesmerized by it. That's the thing I loved most about that film. That is probably the best film I saw of these first 9. What I want to talk about now is The Secret Garden, the 2020 adaptation of The Secret Garden, which stars Julie Walters from Harry Potter, who was Mrs. Weasley in Harry Potter, as Mrs. Medlock, and Colin Firth as Archibald Craven. So The Secret Garden is one of my favorite novels. All right, it's a novel I've taught. It's a novel I've read 3 or 4 times, and it has probably my favorite chapter in it of any book I've ever read. So it's a book that's very, very dear to me. And the 1993 film of The Secret Garden, which starred John Lynch and Kate Maberly and Maggie Smith, is a favorite movie of mine. The music in it is it's one of my favorite film scores. It's by Zbigniew Preisner. I have the soundtrack upstairs. I still remember seeing that film in the theater when I was 18. So that was 27 years ago? 28 years ago? This movie, and I was skeptical of it from the trailer alone. Right? I was really excited to see that there was a new film of it, but then I watched the trailer early last year, and I said, "Ooh, that's not The Secret Garden that I remember." And so basically, I mean, you see it in the trailer, right? These kids are in the garden, and the plants are just fucking just CGI explosions. Everything is CGI'd in the garden. I mean, not everything. There were probably some actual plants, but the changes of the plants, the growth of the plants, the personalities of the plants, it all feels so artificial. Even the robin, right? Who, Mary Lennox develops a kind of friendship with, right? This little robin. The robin itself is completely just a CGI bird, right? It's flying around and you know, it is anthropomorphized in some way, to a degree that that the robin in no other secret garden that I've seen, there's one from the 1940s I've seen as well, has been, right? Because I mean, partly because they didn't have these things in 1993. So yeah, that was the same year that Jurassic Park came out, and you know, special effects had taken like a massive leap forward. But the director of that film, Agnieszka Holland, understood the heart of Frances Hodgson Burnett's novel, and the heart of that novel is the garden itself is the thing that's magical. Like, it doesn't need to be made magical. And when you actually try to do that as a filmmaker, like this guy who made the New Secret Garden did with all the CGI bullshit in it, when you try to make it magical, you're doing two things, right? You're suggesting that it wasn't magical to begin with, so it needed this CGI stuff. And you're making what is supposed to look natural and organic look false and garish, right? And that's exactly what happens, right? It is a fundamental misapprehension of the beating heart of that novel, the sensibility of that novel. And I'm so tired of this in Hollywood films, right? The 2019 Little Women, written and directed by Greta Gerwig, did the same damn thing. Greta Gerwig didn't trust the novel enough to just present it, right? She had to make it feminist. She had to like make it this feminist treatise without understanding that it was feminist without her having to do anything to it. And by manipulating it in that way, she is demonstrating a kind of mistrust or betrayal of the original text, right? She's saying, so Little Women, so it's good, but we can make it better, right? Little Women, you know, Louise May Alcott, she created these great characters and this great story, but let's make it relevant for the modern young woman, for the modern viewer, right? And so what that does is it suggests that Greta Gerwig doesn't think that the story itself is relevant for the modern viewer, that it has to be made so, which is ridiculous. Same thing with this Secret Garden. You know, we live in this world of screens and digital this, that, and the other thing. I can't even imagine what it must be like to be a child growing up now. You know, when I was a kid, and we didn't have, the internet didn't even really exist until I was probably at the very tail end of high school. And then it was a brand new thing. So when I was a child, we didn't even have a computer at home, right? I mean, there were no cell phones and things. We didn't even have a computer in our house. And instead, as children, my brother and I and the other kids who lived on our trailer park, our classmates, et cetera, we were outside a lot, right? It was one of those childhoods where you would come home from school and you would go outside and you would just rove, and your mother would say, all right, be home at 5 o'clock or whatever, 5:30, 6 for dinner. And she wouldn't worry about you. She wouldn't have to, because the world on some level felt safer. Okay, it felt more cloistered somehow, and but at the same time, it felt freer. It felt more alive and more boisterous, and and so you would just go and explore and dig, and it probably wasn't good. I mean, we were digging holes on the property, and Nobody called to see if there were lines or anything buried under there, so that or pipes or gas pipes or anything. So that I suppose wasn't good. But the reason why The Secret Garden works as well as it does and feels as timely as it does, always, the novel I'm talking about here, is because Burnett understood that the natural world, right, getting your hands in the soil, playing in the grass, right, climbing trees, etc., that these things can and should define our childhoods on some level, and that they are restoratives, right? If a child is going through a trauma of some kind, there's really nothing better, not even a book, there's really nothing better for a kid than to get out in the world and to listen to the birds and to, just lay in the tall grass and look up at the sky. There's nothing better for a child than that. I would maybe even argue that there's probably nothing better for an adult than that, especially in the midst of trauma. And when you have a film like this new Secret Garden that gives us the natural world in kind of long shots, right? But then when she's in the garden itself, the fact that all of the plant life has to be manipulated with CGI technology to turn it into a kind of special effect, because when the kids talk about magic, well, clearly then on the screen it needs to appear like it's actual magic, right? That what they're trying to do and what they're longing for and their hopes and their wishes are somehow making these plants turn into lush tropical kind of this, that, and the other thing. It's ridiculous, right? The film is deeply misjudged at the level of conception. The screenwriter who wrote the piece shouldn't be allowed to write screenplays in Hollywood ever again. And that's not even going into the whole Jane Eyre influence on this version of the film, right? Where Miscellanys is burnt down by Craven and his sorrow, and accidentally lights his desk on fire, and the whole damn place just goes up in flames. And there's nothing about it that is moving in the way that it should have been. There's nothing about it that is tender in the way that it should have been. There's nothing about it that is acted with the subtlety that the story deserves, right? The little girl who they cast to play Mary Lennox, they give her so many kind of emotional registers to move through, and at times it's like a hairpin turn from one to the other. And there are moments in her performance where she's just fine, right? She's doing a good job, but she's too young an actress. She's just not a good enough actress yet at her age to be able to navigate all of those turns, right? To navigate the terrain of the role as written. And so as a result, she never feels like a believable character, right? You never buy what she's saying in a given moment. Or, there's a moment where she kind of stands up to Mrs. Medlock, which Mary Lennox does, right? In the novel on some level. And, and it's born in the 93 film, it's born more out of this kind of surliness in the character as Kate Maberly plays her. But in this new film, when she stands up to Medlock, there's something so kind of, well, fuck you, kind of contemporary feeling about it that is just wrong for the piece. It's just wrong for the piece. Yeah, there was a lot wrong with this new Secret Garden, so not recommended at all. One thing that it did, so there's a podcast called Breakfast All Day, and they have a YouTube channel as well, and it's the critics. Christy Lemire, Alonzo Duralde, and Matt Atchity. And I have long thought that Alonzo Duralde he's just not a good critic. Right? He loves movies, but loving movies is not enough to make you a great critic or even a good critic. Okay, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I believe he chose in 2019. He chose Little Women as the best film of the year. And I was just like, oh, good God. Really? Really? Like, you don't if you can't understand, you can like that film all you want, and I have friends who do, but if you can't understand the flaws of that movie, right, the choices that it makes that do a disservice to Louisa May Alcott's story, then you shouldn't be a professional critic in a position to judge those things that you're incapable of judging. You just shouldn't. I watched an episode of Breakfast All Day where they talked about this new Secret Garden, and Alonzo Duralde was just going ape shit for it. Just loved it. Loved it. Was talking about how, it might end up on his 10 best films of the year list, which it didn't, but, the fact that he loved it as much as he did, I mean, he was rhapsodizing over this thing. And I hadn't seen it at that time, but I had seen the trailer, and I was like, I'm suspicious of that. And having now seen the film, it just confirms my suspicion that he just doesn't have the chops to be a critic. He loves movies. He adores films. He treasures them, and they are part of the warp and weft of his life. I get it. But that doesn't make you a good critic. He doesn't have the acumen, right? He doesn't have the sight somehow to look at a film and to be able to assess what it's doing right and why, and what it's doing wrong and why. He just is terrible at that for some reason. And there are other critics who are terrible at it as well. There's one critic in particular whose review of the last paragraph of his review of Lady Bird, another Greta Gerwig movie, it just made me think that critic must be just the dumbest guy in the planet Earth, right? I mean, I wish I could remember the guy's name. But anyway, so there's a ramble. This was long. That's why it's called a ramble. I hope you guys took something from it. And I hope you enjoyed this video. I know a lot of people over the last couple of years have talked to me about how much they love these rambles with the yarn. So I thought I would try to make them more of a kind of staple on my channel than they have been. So I hope you're all doing well. If you're here in America, God knows what the near future holds for us. I fear that it's probably not going to be great. But let's just hang on through this, right? As if COVID wasn't enough for us all to be worried about and adjusting our lives to. Now we have all of this madness as well on top of it. So, 2021 is not, after all, going to be any easier than 2020 was. It doesn't seem so. Anyway, my friends, I will talk to you again very soon. Adios.